Hi, Florencia.
Oh, thank you, Laura, so much for having me here. It's such an honor.
You have been the most requested guest because I talk about you every week on all of my social media channels, all of my podcasts. So it feels so aligned to have you today because I know we've tried many, many times, but I always say like timing is always right.
Absolutely. Yeah. And today we're moving through, in the Maya Cosmovision, we're working with the energy of the intellect and collective consciousness and structure. So it is such a gift to be here during this time of understanding not so much of the mind intellect, but really the heart intellect and that awareness. So thank you so much for having me here.
Yeah, so I just wanted to give our guests a kind of like a backstory of how I met Florencia. So I last year was in California and my friend invited me to a cacao circle. Her name is Giovanna Garcia, and she told us about Tata Pedro and Nana Marina, and I was like, Nana Maria, and I was like, oh my God, these are amazing like people. And she told me about Guatemala and these cacao circles, and I was like, I need to find this in New York. And I actually found them doing a circle, but not through you, through I think Golden Drum. And yeah, and then I did some internet digging and I found you at the assemblage, and that's how I found Florencia. And then synchronistically, like we knew the same people somehow, um, and I went to the assemblage twice last year in the fall and had some pretty metaphysical experiences there. And then since shelter in place, she hosts daily cacao circles every day at 11 a.m. And I've been attending pretty much every day since I think at the end of March. So it's been like 3 months, and it's completely changed my life. Like I have new friends now. I'm tapped into my heart center. It's just like, that's why I wanted to have you on, because you've been such an instrumental part of my life this year. And every person that I meet that knows you is like, there's something about Flo that is, she's just so like an activated leader. Like you really activate leaders. You're like such a special person. So I just wanted to say that first.
Thank you so much. Making me blush here. I'm gonna match my huipil. Such an honor, and it's so funny. I actually didn't know that you had connected through Golden Drum until now, and I
Mhm.
was just with the Golden Drum community in Guatemala. So our circles continue to weave together.
Yeah. So I like to always start with origin stories because I feel like that gives us an idea of who you are and how you came to cacao. So you have a long origin stories, but if you can just give us like a little quick idea of like where did you grow up? I know you're from Argentina, and you came to the U.S. When you were, I think, in your 20s. No, when you were in your teens. And then
Mhm.
like, how did you grow up?
Thank you. Thank you so much for this question. And before we get started, I just want to take a moment, if we can just bring one hand to the heart and one hand to the belly. Um, I like to just take a moment to give gratitude for the space and for having this container of exploration, and also honoring those who have guided us here. And as you mentioned, Nana Marina and Tata Pedro have been huge leaders for me and guides for me to be here in the space and understand what it's like to move through this human experience. So honoring them and honoring those who are respecting this beautiful land that we reside on. Also honoring the elements of nature that are here to support us and guide the way. So we'll take a deep breath in together and exhale it out. And thank you for this beautiful question as well. When I think about what got me here in this space, I feel like, as you mentioned, there's so many stepping stones.
Mhm.
But for me, I think the biggest process was coming to the States. I moved, as you mentioned, from Argentina at the age of 11, and I didn't speak the language. And so I closed myself a lot through arriving here and trying to fit into a certain identity. I really closed off my roots and my connection to Argentina and my origin. And it wasn't until probably my early 20s that I started really honoring and finding the reverence in where I come from. My mom has always been into spirituality and diving deep into the curiosity of all things. So she grew up Catholic, but then also was a devotee of Sai Baba, who is a guru from India who just passed away maybe a decade ago. She's also a rebirther, so works a lot with breath and has always guided us into really questioning things and always knowing that we're here for a reason, and really always working from the sense of gratitude and personal responsibility. So I always mention how with my brother, when we would get into an argument, she would say, well, what's your role in that? And I would get so frustrated because it's like, no, I was not wrong in this. And my ego would start speaking. But then I realized that, of course, I have a role in that. And by taking responsibility, it's not that I'm at fault, but I'm actually in power of shifting the situation. So that was always, part of my understanding and values. And it wasn't until I went to Guatemala after my divorce in my mid-20s that I started really getting curious on what it's like to really be myself. I was married. I got married at the age of 21. I really gave up a lot of who I was in order to be there for my ex-husband, and we both lost each other and lost our personal individuality in the process of trying to be unconditional towards one another. And I knew that I could try to save this marriage, or I could actually go out in the world and continue following my mission, which was always for me curiosity to finding a way of expressing ourselves. So I share all of this to get us to understand that in order to really find our voices, sometimes we have to go through the shadow aspect. And I definitely explored all of that through my early teens and into my 20s, what it's like to lose your voice, what it's like to have to think that you have to fit in a certain way to be accepted and to be understood. And so then I went the other extreme and I totally became myself. And of course, I value how others are showing up in their truth, but it doesn't really shift the way that I follow my truth. And I honor that we all have our individual voices that brings the collective together.
Mm.
So.
Thank you for sharing. And I noticed that you just started sharing your personal story recently in our circles, and I just really value how open you are, and we all look up to you, and there's people in our circle who are much younger, like how old is Amaru, like 8?
Yeah.
To all the way to like 70s, but we all see Flo as this like guiding light, as this leader, and to see how you're so vulnerable and transparent about your own journey and how uncomfortable some things make you, it gives us the permission to say, like, we don't have it figured out either. So I really cherish that about you.
Thank you. I have to honor my mom for that. She always really allowed me to be myself and was there as really like a friend and a sister. A single mom, I feel like, has to go through a lot, and sometimes they don't necessarily know how to be a mom and setting rules, but she has been really there for me to just always be heard. And I feel like the moment that we can have that space, we can better understand what it's like to play. So thank you also for allowing me to play and try to understand this experience together.
So you recently shared that after your divorce, you were going on a trip to Guatemala with your friend who didn't actually end up going on the trip, but then you ended up there and then you found cacao. Can you tell us about that discovery?
Absolutely. So we're actually going to have him in the circle at the end of the month. I'm super excited. When I moved back to New York from San Francisco, I started diving deeper into understanding, okay, who was I before I became a wife and trying to establish a family? Who was Florencia? And I connected with a dear friend, Darius, who does a lot of shamanic work. I didn't know what shamanism was back then, but I knew the deep connection to creator in other ways. And so he shared with me that he wanted to go to Guatemala and do this course on lucid dreaming and astral projection. I had no idea what that meant, which now I know that is like diving deeper into our connection to meditation, different layers of awareness. And lucid dreaming is really being conscious in your dream, so being awake within the dream. Mm-hmm. So I was planning beautiful trip all throughout South America. I hadn't been able to travel for about 12 years since I was an immigrant, and I wasn't able to travel for that long. So this for me was just like another awakening process, right, on its own, the aspect of traveling. So I wanted to go into Argentina, Chile, Peru, and all these other countries. We had a really long list, and his only request was Guatemala. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was like, why would we go to Guatemala? I've never even heard of like people going there, but fine, if like that's where you want to go, I'll compromise. So the months went by and we kept cutting our trip short because we were big dreamers, and you know, reality hit that you can only travel for so long in New York City. You know, we have these dates. So we ended up saying, okay, let's just go to Guatemala, do this course. And a month or two before we were supposed to go, he decided to go earlier, to go to a festival and not do the course with me. I had already taken time off from work, bought my ticket, convinced my mom that Guatemala was safe for me to travel to. And so I was like, okay, I guess I'm supposed to go. I'm just going to do this. And it was really, I think it was my second trip outside of the States by myself. And it was a long month experience. And it really just changed my life. I was really able to understand beginning to try to understand who I was. I'm still trying to figure that out, but it really gave me the tools to feel safe in that exploration. And during that process, I had a cacao ceremony with a Mayan elder who's from the Quiche community. And Guatemala has 22 different ethnic groups that all work with the sacred fire in one way or another. The Quiche and the Cachiquel and the Sutujil are most of the communities that I've worked with. But I remember experiencing cacao for the first time with him, and it was such a simple ceremony. There was the connection to the sacred fire. There was a meditation. We drank the cacao, and I'm sure your community knows what cacao is, but just in case, it's the pure form of chocolate, which really for the Mayan communities is a vehicle to dive into the connection to ourselves, the connection to the energy that has many names. Maybe some of us know it as spirit, universe, source. So I remember after we had our ceremony, I opened my eyes and I looked at the stars, and I was just blown away by that space of just nothingness, but it felt like everything.
Yeah.
And it sounds really cliche, but those of you who have experienced that moment, it's just like, wow, at its core, life is so beautiful and so simple. So we begin to create all these dimensions of illusions that take us away from remembering. So I feel like that was one of the deepest experiences of me remembering. And yeah, I wanted to then bring that back to New York. And when I tried to bring it to my brother, I realized it takes a little bit more than just, you know, offering the cacao.
He was like, what?
Yeah, exactly. Him and his girlfriend were both like, I don't get it. Your sister's so weird. Now they drink cacao every day and we'll have a company together.
Now they're in the company. So
practice.
So you finally convinced Fede, your brother, and your co-founders of Cacao Laboratory, which, by the way, anyone listening to this has to drink this cacao. It's so delicious. I'm drinking air for compassion. And so at what point did you start the company and you started to do these circles where you were inviting people to come?
So I got back from Guatemala and I brought the cacao. I was still working with cacao on my own, but I got kind of disengaged from this idea of bringing it to, you know, my community and my surroundings. I was still trying to express my voice. I was still getting very intimidated by being in front of people and sharing myself. So there was a long pause from coming back to Guatemala. There was about a year pause, and I took a trip to South Africa, which was another one of those trips that I got brought along. Didn't know why, but I had a friend there, so I'm like, sure. And during that journey, there was 2 weeks of where I was working with breath, working with cacao, and my friends and I were, daydreaming about what we wanted to create with our lives. And I started getting these downloads of wanting to do ceremonies and doing different experiences with cacao. And so I called my brother, and again, I was in a partnership at the time. I called him and I was like, hey, this thing isn't working. I just kind of want to explore what it's like to be by myself and really dive into my mission. So we ended our relationship, and then the next day I called my brother and I was like, I want to do this and I need your help. I think back then my brother and I weren't talking too much. We never really understood each other up until working with cacao, because he was coming from a different mindset. I was more of an adventure soul who was really diving into creativity, but never really had a path. And my brother was always like a business person and was like very structured with his life. And we just didn't understand each other. We were always looking for the acceptance of my mom as well. So there was a lot of miscommunication. And through cacao, I knew that this would be a way of really healing a lot of the family dynamic. And this is also why I wanted to move back to New York after my marriage, to just be able to find this connection with my brother. I knew if I was able to heal that dynamic, I would be able to better understand the connection to the male energy. Yeah. So through cacao, we were able to really heal our relationship. And you see us now, I mean, we have our moments, of course, we're brother and sister, but it's like now we just really honor each other's spaces, and we really respect that we sometimes think different, but it doesn't mean that either one is wrong. There's a lot of conversations that were able to be healed through sitting with cacao and just, creating a safe space for each other to share. So long way of answering your question. It took about a year for us to decide that we wanted to take this on together. And when I called him, he's like, okay, when you get back from South Africa, we'll go to Guatemala and we'll find a farm that we can work with and just begin there. My idea of this was like, hey, let's buy a couple of kilos I can share with my friends, maybe sell like a little bit, but I just want to have ceremonies. I want to share this with people. My brother's mind is like, let's just bring this to, New York City and the States. So it takes two minds to really come into that balance.
Yeah. But I think that's why you work so well together, because you're so feminine energy, like you're so intuitive and you're creative and you just want to like do ceremonies all day, and he's very much like the logical, like strategic thinker, and I think you need both in a business.
Yes, absolutely. He has taught me so much, and I feel like there's layers to really finding ourselves. For me, it was first like understanding what's my core, what are my values, and what is it that I want to express. And then there's also that aspect of feeling held and nourished so you can explore your passion. And then there's that step of like, okay, I'm branching off, I'm opening my wings and I'm ready to fly. And I feel like now we're at that stage where I'm learning more about what it takes to actually have the business running and what it takes to the logistics and all that. And he's diving more into the educational aspect. But for a while we were really playing in this balance of, okay, I'm really just expressing the education and why we're doing what we're doing, and you share how we do what we do.
Yeah. So in your Instagram, you say that you want to bring ceremony to your everyday life, and you're the type of person that I want to like emulate more of. Like I want to take each moment and just savor every moment and give thanks, and that's like how we should live. What does ceremony mean to you, and why is it so important for you or for all of us?
That's such a beautiful question. So I was talking to, we were sharing earlier, my day today consisted of starting with a cacao circle that we do every morning. And then I was in a circle with a community from the Zapata Nation. There are about 400 to 700 people of their community left, and they're deep in the Amazon. And then I was in a circle with Nana Marina, who's my teacher, my guide from the Sutujil tribe, sharing cacao. And between this call and that, I was in another call that was talking about isolation and how that actually allows us to come together. So for me, it's like every moment we have an opportunity, and we also have a choice. We have the opportunity of finding a deeper connection with ourselves, but we also have the choice of allowing that or just taking the moment for granted and let it slip by. So with the Zapata Nation, they were talking about a declaration that is being shared regarding the connection to our Mother Earth. And for many indigenous communities, they see our land as a being, as a living energy, right? And there's this deep connection that we have forgotten about. And of course we have forgotten because nobody allowed us to remember. And we're so busy with our minds that we forget, right? That there are these moments. But many communities talk about asking permission, right? When you walk into someone's house, you're gonna knock on the door first. And maybe sometimes you'll open the door because you know them, but then you say, how are you? So there is this interaction. And for many of us, we haven't been they haven't shared with us this understanding. So we walk on this land just like we were walking in our own room, and we forget that there's a sense of reverence and respect. And when that respect isn't offered to our land, think about how you communicate with another person. If you're not offering respect to that person is most likely not going to respect you. Yeah. So the sense of ceremony is just to remember that life can be a celebration, and it can be, a way of giving gratitude to every moment that we have. And I'm still learning what that's like, but I feel like the more that we practice it and the more that we offer that invitation for ourselves and we set those expectations, then we begin to show up in a different way. Mm-hmm. And of course, I have my moments of being human where I do walk around the land that I forget that it's being energy that's supporting us, or perhaps I don't acknowledge somebody that's in front of me. But it's also important to learn from that, and what do we receive for the next experience. So in short, for me, ceremony is a way of giving thanks. It's a way of giving reverence, of giving honor to everything that moves through our experience, and also to ask, right, the questions and learn the space to listen.
Yeah, that's beautiful. But that takes like slowing down, right? And I feel like we both live near New York City. We both live in America. And that takes a certain level of, I guess, like pace and drive and ambition. And then you go from that to like talking to indigenous people. How do you marry both worlds into your own life? Like, do you feel like you're drawn to one more than the other?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to summarize my deep thoughts, but
you don't have to summarize.
When I think about that, it's like we create our living situations. And I know that that's difficult for some of us to believe. When I was married, like I had a lot of dark moments, and there was a lot of mental, emotional abuse. And for a long time, I think like I wish that I hadn't shared my experiences back then, because a lot of my friends have a certain observation about my ex-partner, but I created that myself. And not to put people at fault for their relationships, but knowing that we have a role in what we create. And just because we've been in this situation up until this point doesn't mean that it needs to continue on from here. Yeah. So I created a life where I could be in both worlds, where half of my time is communicating with indigenous communities. But when I reached that space of, I'm like, I can't really sit at the table with my mom and her partner and really have a conversation. This is where maybe I need to take a space from that and come back to my experience. And that's why I love living in New York City, because you can't just be in one world, you know, it's like learning how to live in many. And, you know, being an immigrant, not knowing the language, as I mentioned at the beginning, it was very difficult for me to accept where I came from and accept myself. And it wasn't until I understood, like, wow, I actually have the blessing of being able to sit with a Hispanic community and truly understand and not try to pretend, but really understand where they're coming from, and then come into the States. And I grew up here, so I can also relate to that. So it's not that I need to actually be from there or be from there, but I can relate. So the biggest thing, I feel like our responsibility for us who are in this awakening process and really feeling drawn and called to spirituality and wanting to support the awakening of people, is really being able to relate. And it's not to force, you know, our beliefs onto someone, but how do we actually translate them in the language that they understand so they can receive the same wisdom. And I know that for many people that sit with Nana Marina, they really feel it and they understand it. But if you don't come from the connection to spirituality, it might be a lot.
Yeah.
You know? So just I feel like being in the city and being able to also live with the communities has allowed me to really understand both worlds and not have to be in one or the other 100%, because I can be present in both.
Mm. That's beautiful. I mean, I have now been in more ceremonies with indigenous tribes than I've ever had in my entire life, just on Zoom. And it's been so, I can only explain it as like a metaphysical experience. It's like hard to explain because you're like, but they're on Zoom, so how can you like feel that energy? But wow, it's like very powerful what happens in those circles.
Yeah, the elders just know how to access certain energies that are beyond words. And I feel like that's why they have been suppressed for so long, because there's so many people that don't fully understand. They haven't allowed themselves to fully understand where this is coming from and how it could relate to their experience. So it becomes almost like the fear takes over.
So you've been an entrepreneur now for a couple of years, and you've, you know, gone through your own personal, let's say, challenges that were meant for you, obviously. What are some things that you've done or reminded yourself during those dark times?
So as I mentioned, I think it's important to create our environment. And when I shared about that we create our lives, it's really like, what are our choices that we surround ourselves with? And what I always saw, there was a couple of different mentors that maybe I didn't meet physically but really helped me, like Elizabeth Gilbert. I know, so silly, but Eat, Pray, and Love. I would walk my dog. It's one of the parks in San Francisco. And I remember just like listening to the audiobook again and again, and hearing her traveling through the world and getting to know these communities, and having her share those moments of like being on the ground, just crying her heart out because she didn't know how to get out of that. But then hearing the other side of like, she was finally able to leave and all of these doors open for her. That gave me a safe idea of starting to envision, right? Like, what would it be like if I left my ex-husband? And, you know, these moments of freedom that I had walking through the park, and you know, calling perhaps my mom and just having her listen to my experience. She also was a really, I have to say, throughout the many difficult challenges, I've also have been blessed to having beings like my mom and my brother that really helped me through, because she never judged anything that happened in my relationship and really allowed me to be fully open. And so she, you know, she gave her advice, but not from a place of like, you should do this.
Yeah.
And maybe at some moments she should have, but you know, that allowed me to be fully honest with her. And when things got really rough, like, my brother came and was like, hey, like, let's just, go and start over.
Mm.
But during those times, I always just continued imagining what it would be like to have a different reality, and starting to create it in details and understanding how I would like to feel.
Mm.
Because even if we start working off like what we would like to see in our lives, but we don't know what emotional connection we want to those visions, we can arrive to those spaces and still feel the same emptiness that we felt during those moments that we were imagining it.
Yeah.
So I think it took a lot of self-work and healing, but visualization and just observing the emotions that we're moving through, and journaling also really helped me.
Mhm.
And having guides that inspire you to just know that there's more than what you feel you're living now. The
Yeah.
limitations were there for one period of your life to give you the training, but they don't need to be there eternally. It's just as long as you say, okay, I've had enough and I learned, now I'm ready for something more.
Yeah. We're both huge fans of Dr. Joe Dispenza. I read all of his books, listen to all of his podcasts. I think it's also that idea that like this is not everything, like we are physically and like our experiences is not the end all be all of everything. There's like so much more than what meets the eye, right? Like I feel like we both have this sense of, from what you say during the circles, is that there's more to this physical reality.
Yeah, and that was always a huge thing for me. As I mentioned, my mom really was always bringing in this idea, and we would have laughter meditations and crying meditations when we were young through Osho. And yeah, Joe Dispenza was also somebody that really helped me. I learned about him in my late teens through The Secret and What the Bleep Do We Know, and from there, understanding that we start really working with our mind, and really when we begin to connect an emotion to that vision, then it starts becoming real. But there's often this moment that we forget about the emotional aspect, and I bring it up again and again because it's really crucial for manifestation. Because even if we receive it, even if we see it, we feel like, oh yes, this is what I wanted, but we didn't create the soil, the ground for this to manifest. We don't know how to sustain it.
Yeah.
And consistency, I think, is like the biggest thing if we want to really shift our life, and showing up again and again and doing the baby steps to really get us where we would like to be.
Hmm. So let's talk about cacao for a second, or a couple minutes. So the reason why I love cacao is it is a plant medicine. It's non-psychoactive, but it does, do stuff to our chemistry, our biology, and it is a spiritual plant. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. I can talk about cacao for hours. Cacao, we all know chocolate in its purest form. Well, maybe not in its purest form, but we all know chocolate. So cacao is a seed that has been, or a bean that has been worked with as a spiritual plant medicine for thousands of years by mostly the Mayan community, but really all over Mesoamerica, a little bit of South America. And it was used by the elite in festivities, celebrations, and also offerings. And this is a beverage that we can have as a way of celebration, as a way of connection, as a way of giving us physical energy, right? On a physical level, it's opening up the blood vessels, stimulating blood flow. So you feel this beautiful rush of energy, but it's also relaxing the muscles, the joints, the nervous system. So it creates a really powerful balance for us to physically feel this opening to explore our connection to the self. And Nana, even today, was mentioning, Nana Marina was mentioning how we can have this as a drink, or we can have this as a spiritual experience. And that's really the intention that we put into the beverage. I feel like when we open ourselves to the possibilities of exploring, okay, what is beyond, right? This body that we carry, who am I inside of all of this, and what's my role and what's my connection? When we start asking the questions, I feel like the answers begin to show up, And as I mentioned, cacao really is opening us up. It's bringing more oxygen to the brain, the skin, the heart. So it's creating this hyper awareness of both what's happening outside of ourselves, but also within us. And the more that you, and I'm sure you've seen this through these last few months, the more that you start working with the plant, it's like the plant begins to speak to you. And that's, again, another thing that's like on a logical level, like, what does that even mean? But it really allows us to receive messages. And now we're listening, right? We're not so distracted. So for many of us, we feel the creativity is starting to come up, and you've been so creative with your Instagram, which I'm like admiring. It's so beautiful. And like, you know, when I start working with people that are doing a dieta, a diet with cacao, meaning like they drink cacao every day and they're creating space for journaling and creating, they'll send me like all these songs that all of a sudden they're starting to play drums and they're starting to sing. And that's just always been there, you know, but now we're actually allowing ourselves to express it. So for me, the biggest gift of cacao has been allowing me to be, allowing me to explore myself and not take myself so seriously. There's a beautiful quote from Almost Famous that says, "Don't take it so seriously. If you never take it seriously, you never get hurt. If you never get hurt, you always have fun." And it's just like, it's exactly how this medicine is. Of course, there are moments of like, you'll feel the tears coming through and you'll feel this, you know, these emotions rising up, and you're like, I haven't felt this in so long. I like forgot about that particular experience that has really dictated my life until this moment. And how did I forget? It's so simple. So it really brings up to the surface anything that is really blocking the connection to the self.
Mm-hmm. You know what's so beautiful about, I just had like this like ding light bulb moment where because we're all drinking the same cacao, which is from you, and you know, you put your energy and the people that you hire put their energy, and I feel like we're all connected at like a cellular level now, that it's the synchronicities are, I stopped keeping track of all the synchronicities that have been happening to me with our own circle. Like I'll be saying something to somebody and then, you know, another person will exactly type that in the chat box or something. Because I feel like we're all tapped into this consciousness of cacao.
It's so true, but we are all tapped into this consciousness all together, and cacao is just emphasizing that. And so it's just so profound, and I totally know exactly what you mean. There are moments sometimes where I'm like, okay, this is weird. Like I'll even think or feel something, and then it'll like show up on my phone, or you know, be like somebody that I hadn't talked to in a really long time, and there's like, oh, I needed to say this to this person, and they're like, ask me the question. It's like, whoa, how did that happen? But I feel like it's because now we're open, right, to the possibilities. And the Joe Dispenza work really aligns with what cacao is bringing forth. I feel like he's taking like the ancestral wisdom and making it approachable on a scientific level. But he talks about heart coherence, and really cacao is working with heart coherence.
Yeah. And actually, in when I learned about the heart chakra, it is the most expansive energy center, because it is in sacred geometry. It's the Shakti and the Shiva. It's the feminine and masculine. It's the seat of our soul. So whenever you're trying to do anything in life, you have to get it out of your head and get it out of your gut and bring it back to your heart center, because it is the most expansive. And it's so hard to even explain, because in our language and in our culture, love is like, it's kind of seen as just between romantic partners, or like you tell your mom you love them, but it's so much more than that. It's like, and I hear you saying it all the time too during circle, where you say like you have to come from everything with love and, you know, expandedness. And I think cacao really helps you to tap into that, because it's opening those vessels and really dropping into a lot of like uncomfortable conversations we've been having lately, right? With like love and patience.
Yes, and I feel like thank you for bringing this up. I think it's so important to understand. We hear in spirituality, we hear all these words that are often repeated again and again, and sometimes when we hear them so much, we almost become numb to them. And this idea of love, I feel like, has been used so much, but not many of us truly understand what unconditional love is. And unconditional love can move through a partnership because they're a reflection of ourselves, right? They're our sacred mirrors. So they allow us to see what we can't see within ourselves. But I feel like what another gift that cacao has given me, aside from creativity and really owning my voice, is to live from a space of unconditional love. And that doesn't mean that I don't, raise my voice sometimes, or I don't have emotions that arise, but that's part of unconditional love. Unconditional love is like the creative force.
Mm-hmm.
And for many of us, in the spiritual world, we're light workers. So we work through going into the connection of light. And if you look at the Maya cosmovision, we talk about the white path, the sacred path.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that the shadow isn't present, right? That's what's allowing us to see the light. And I had a vision when maybe like our second year of working with cacao. I think I shared this in the circle the other day, but we were at Governor's Island, and that's a military training. And I had this feeling of like, whoa, warriors of love. We are creating warriors of love, right? We're moving through this together. And I see this so strongly in our circles now that, there are very uncomfortable conversations. And I know that some people are like ready to be like,
Bye.
my heart is open. I want to celebrate. But like, hey, we got to move through these conversations so we can continue like, expanding. And cacao has allowed us to really create that space of listening to each other, which is so profound.
It's so profound. It has allowed me to be an active listener, because I have a lot of opinions and I have a lot of things to say, but I really try to like hold back so that I can listen more, and being patient when somebody says something that I'm like, I don't agree with. I'm like, but coming from a place of love and like compassion has helped me so, so much. So I actually did want to ask you, because you've been holding these spaces now for pretty much the entire quarantine, and this wasn't something that you necessarily signed up for. You said, we're going to do this for a week, and then a week turned into pretty much the entire spring and summer. So how has it been for you holding this space every single day? Like, aren't you tired? Do you ever want to just like say I'm going on vacation?
It's so funny because my brothers didn't ask. It was his idea in the first place, and he was like, okay, like that was good, Flo. It was supposed to be a week and take a day off. And like him and his partner have been asking me now, I think after like the second or third week, to take a day off. But for me, it's like this idea of work is very interesting in our society, because the fire is lit every day in the Maya cosmovision. The elders are connecting with the fire every day. There's not a day on or off. This is like what we're here for, and we connect with Creator. And for me, it's given me a sense of commitment that is really, really powerful. And seeing the evolution of so many that at first were really shy to speak, and now they're like, honoring their voices so strongly, and like,
that's so beautiful.
yeah. And that's a true leader. I'm still working really on myself, and I still have a long way to go. But when I saw my vision, when I left my marriage, was like, I want to give a voice to women that have lost their voices, because I had lost mine. And it was, my choice to lose my voice. The external world, gave me plenty of reasons to do it, but I chose to quiet down until I realized how important my voice was. And I want to be able to create that container for other people, not just women, but the world. Because if we had a space to actually express our voices, we can actually understand what's moving through inside of us.
Yeah.
So for me, it's been such a gift and a blessing. And this idea that I'm like showing up every day is something that's like, oh, I have to do, has never felt like that. I receive so much from everybody that shares, and everybody that is like growing alongside us. And being able to be with the elders even through the online world is huge, because the even like the aspect of cacao, I do certain trainings for people to get educated on cacao and the connection to self, but it's not like you can learn this in 9 weeks or 8 weeks that we do it. Like, this is a beginning process, and then you have to show up every day.
Yeah.
So how can I expect someone else to do it if I can't do it myself?
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I wanted to ask because I was like, this is like holding space, there's an art to it, because you hold space based on how far you're willing to go, and also holding that container. So I just wanted to say, like, wow, amazing. What is your, wait, okay, I have so many personal questions for you. What is your Noel? What is your energy?
So I'm Tihash. Tihash is the curandera. It's the healer. It's the warrior that is, I don't like the word fighting, but moving for the energy of healing of humanity and the earth. It's the medicine energy through herbalism and plant medicine. So I know. Like, I didn't even, this one, I don't know. I mean, I chose it on a higher level, but from the moment that I said yes to changing my life, it's been like, okay, go here and go here.
I'm too Kame. I'm the death. I'm literally like, and I'm doing the play Akasha, and I'm the change maker.
Wow.
It's very, very, yeah, it's in my energy.
Yeah, Keme is really powerful because it's the transcendence, and it's the energy with our ancestors. And those who carry that energy have to see a lot of shadow and have to move through a lot of shadow, and just being really strong in their roots, because there's a lot that shows up.
Yeah. So this is something that you always ask us, and I want to throw it back to you. You always say, like, we're going to be the leaders that we were always meant to be. Like, she does this beautiful blessing every day, and now I've memorized it and I follow along with you. What do you envision yourself to be as the leader that you are meant to be? Like, what, and also, so that's part one, and then part two is like, what do you envision the future to be like?
Thank you. I don't want to sound superficial, but I really feel like this is what I had strived to be, to really just show up in my truth and just create a space for others to step into their own leadership roles. And I feel like ceremony is the perfect container for that. Manadi, one of the elders that I work with, says that a true leader is igniting the leadership qualities in all of us. And I strive to really create a space for people to have their voices be leading the way. And hopefully everybody understands that I'm not there to tell them how to show up, but really creating a container for them to understand their personal truth. A true leader for me is somebody that really shows up without waiting for approval or, acceptance. And my mom this morning, I also shared this in circle today. I was like half asleep today, and she, going deeper into my personal life, I have psoriasis, and psoriasis is a skin disorder that, if you look on, Louise Hay talks a lot about the emotional connection, and this is a layer of protection, right? Our skin is our biggest organ. So for me, it was a way of protecting myself to not have to fully be seen. And it's been a lot of shedding layers, because you can't show up and ask people to show up in their truth and be loud about it if one can't do it. So it's been, these last couple of years, a lot of like, restructuring the way that I think about not just the world, but myself, and also honoring the process, that I don't need to have it all figured out to start expressing. So for me, a true leader is the one that really shows up. Oh, so why did I bring up my mom? So my mom this morning was looking at my psoriasis and was like, Florencia, can you just work with a mantra today? Can you work with the understanding that you are just as important for me and for your dad as your brother is? And I'm half asleep. I'm like, why is she talking about this? Like, I love my brother, but there's obviously these deep roots that I still, on a logical level, I understand, but my inner child is like, hey, like, remember me?
Yeah.
So I think it's just honoring that I don't need like the approval of other people to know that I'm doing my part. And with working with different elders and working in communities, you're not getting patted on the shoulder all the time. And it's been really beautiful and humbling to see that, like, there's big groups and you're doing like so much work for that ceremony or that process to take place, and you're not acknowledged at that moment. Does that mean that you didn't show up? No, actually, it means that you were so engraved and weaved into the experience that you were a part of them in that process. So you don't need to be acknowledged. So for me, that was a huge training and understanding. And yeah, I think it's like owning your worth and not needing the external world to let you know, but also knowing that you need to show up to be that worth. And showing up and being the example, not talking about it, but really taking action and being about it.
Yeah, taking the ego out. I think the ego wants acceptance and like that pat on the back. Florencia does so much during these, you have to translate and then you have to wait and you have to host. I'm like, wow, she's doing so much. I hope you know how much you're doing.
Thank you. That's a lot of years of being in the restaurant industry. You learn a lot, like managing a million things. It's so fun.
And then sometimes it's like delayed and then they can't hear you. So then they talk over you. And I'm like, oh my God, she has so much patience.
It's a long training process. Like, look, the ego is so important in our lives because it gives us, again, the worth. But my ego has had to sleep so much and rest so much during this process, and it's been so beautiful to observe.
Yeah. So the second part of the question was like, what do you want to see the future to be? But I want it to be more specific to you. Like, what are your dreams? Like, what else do you want to, like, let's dream a little bit. Like, what's coming into Florencia's mind?
I'm really good about dreaming. When I started, Cacao Lab has many layers and many aspects. I really see it as a spirit, as a being, and it's really taking form. When I wanted, on a personal level, it was Cacao Lab being the vehicle that allows me to really see my brother, and as my mom was sharing this celebration today, to really see the importance of him and I. Seeing the unity, we chose each other for this world to be together, and really honoring that. And I think that really reflects on the world as a whole. There's a lot of separation and a lot of illusions that we are better than others or worse than others, or we need to be a certain way to be accepted by others. I feel like Cacao is just answers all of our questions, because it has given Cacao Lab an opportunity to be a business, right? So we are a business, we have a product, but this product is an invitation for people to understand so many aspects of this human experience. On one level, it's like, how can I live in love? On another level is like, what is my relationship to the land? Because somebody that's holding circles or ceremonies, they need to honor the land. They need to honor the elements, because it's like one in one. Like, you can't be in a yoga class and not tell somebody to move without breathing. Right. So cacao and the elements, it's like hand in hand. So it's a direct message for us to remember the connection to the energies that sustain us. It also, for me, it's been a huge dream to be able to have be in a system within the system, really create a system within the system. So not to try to create a whole new system. That's a lot of work. That takes a lot of exploration and experimentation. And I don't know if our society is ready for that, but we are ready for healing more than, drastic change, but that needs to come through healing. And cacao is medicine, right? It heals our wounds. And this is not on a scientific level, perhaps, like that idea of cacao medicine might not work on that aspect, but it is really healing our physical bodies. Tons of magnesium, many of us are deficient in, and as a collective, it gives us a way of understanding how we begin to honor each other's spaces. Because the biggest problem right now is that we're putting responsibility on everyone else, and we're not taking personal responsibility on how we actually change the world. That's a very, very intense question. And that's a lot of, I think it takes many of us to understand, but through these circles, it gives us an invitation to explore that. And, we have this conversation a lot of like, what is it that you want to see in the world? What is it that we're creating here? And the moment that we start asking the questions, we start really bringing that manifestation forth. So we know that money is an energy that speaks very loud in the world today. And through Cacao Lab, we've been able to really have a voice in how, we create an impact and personal responsibility on like, hey, like, we're not okay with that. And we are a business, so we have a voice in how this flows. And we're still at the very beginning stage, but really our dream with my brothers to begin to decolonize the chocolate industry, the cacao industry, and really have it be a way of going directly to the communities. It also has allowed us to create a platform for many communities to be heard. We work directly with the Mayans, but we're starting to work with other communities that perhaps people would never have the capability of connecting with. So many of these communities carry the true ancestral wisdom that the world is needing in this moment. So there's so many ways that our brand is really starting to create, the change. And again, we still have a lot of growth to do and a lot of understanding, but I feel like we really live by the example of not just talking about it, but like living it. Like my brother and I are like every day, ever since we started, it's like we live this brand and it's our baby. And, it's all we talk about 90% of the time. If we're hanging out, anybody, it's like cacao's involved, but through that process, we're truly understanding what it's like to make the change.
Yeah, I just love what you just said because it is a point that I wanted to make. Flo's company is called Cacao Laboratory, and they source from a farm from Ecuador, right? And if you don't know how cacao is manufactured, farmed, and then sold throughout the world, you should really watch the documentary Rotten on Netflix, because your mind is going to be like, what? It's so fucked up. And the fact that you can decolonize that and have the farmers actually get paid for their cocoa beans and have that money go directly to them is like life-changing for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much beauty and magic that this plant brings us, but there's a lot of shadow to this plant. And this is again an invitation, right, to start exploring how our whole system works. There's many layers to it, and if we start just being like, hey, let's just pay off the farmers and give them a better life. Well, what about all the other farmers? And what happens if Cacao Lab no longer exists? What happens to those families that are now dependent on us? So I think it's important to really understand how we're creating an impact, but how are we creating a legacy, right? So it's like the moment that we leave, they're not dependent on us. And this is the same thing that we work through the circles. It's like, if I'm not there, you guys are still understand the magic of cacao and still be able to understand the divinity, because you are doing your own part in showing up. And when we are working with conscious business dynamics, it's really important to understand that we all have a good intention at first, but it's important to understand that we're not making anybody dependent on us, but we're actually supporting their process of evolution even after we're gone. And also, before we jump into trying to solve a problem, we've been having a lot of discussions about what's happening here in the States with the Black Lives Matter movement. I could have easily started, talking about it and sharing my own perspective, but it makes more sense to bring people that have been living this experience for a really long time and just listen and observe how do we bring forth that change. And so with with cacao and really any business that you're working with, it's important to really understand what are the blind spots within that business and how can you actually make a change in those blind spots instead of trying to change the whole thing.
Exactly. It's beautifully said. So is there anything that I didn't ask you that you want to share?
I know that we talked a lot about cacao and my personal journey, and thank you for creating that space. But as I mentioned, cacao is just one aspect of how we can really be ourselves in this life. So I really want people to dive into the exploration of what gets them excited. For me, the environment and human justice, environmental justice has been something that really gave me chills every time that it was spoken. And oftentimes I felt very frozen of not knowing what to do. There's been many points in my life where I didn't have a purpose and I ran away from myself again and again because I didn't know what my purpose was. And we don't need to understand what this human experience is so overwhelming if we try to understand the whole thing. But my invitation is for you to explore what gets you excited or what really ignites your spirit in one way or another, what awakens the sensations within you, and what is that message trying to tell you? Because we all have a different role. There's many plant medicines out there and many guardians and many messengers of these plants. There's many different aspects of the human consciousness that we still need to explore. So we each have a role within the society. And if we look at the ancestral tribes, they all worked in community tribes, right? Because everybody had a role within that.
Right.
So it's important for us to understand what is our role and not trying to put a word onto it, but start asking the questions and let the spirit guide you.
It's beautiful. Well, please buy some cacao from Cacao Laboratory. Join the circles. Flo, you also do intensives, right? They can learn more about that on your website. And you have a virtual shala, which I want to participate in. I want to retrieve my soul and all the magical things that you do. Is there anything else that I forgot?
No, I think you covered it all. Amazing.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Flo. Matios.
Matios.
Thank you in Mayan. See, I learned so much. Oh my God. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. Such an honor.